Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So, just letting you guys know this session's going to be recorded. This is the Change Practitioner certification course. Those of you guys don't know me, my name is Zach Cleghorn. I'm an international trainer and facilitator. I've worked with organizations around the world to promote change in institutions. I want to welcome everybody to this course. This is a free certification program through Star Global. Um, this isn't just theory. We'll explore how change actually happens in organizations, communities, and even within ourselves. We'll learn about the frameworks, but most importantly, we'll learn how to apply them as practitioners and leaders throughout the organization. By the end of this course, you'll understand what it means to drive transformation, to move processes, strategies, and where they need to be. And you're not just learning things to just check a box, you're building the mindset of change management culture in your organization. For me, this program represents years of experience leading real change, from workforce development initiatives to Lean Six Sigma, ISO projects, and consulting projects around industries around the country. I've worked in Amazon, I've worked at Ford, I've worked at Walmart distribution, I've worked in Pfizer, Heister Yale, and the list goes on and on. But for me, change happens when we develop a culture mindset for we can do better as an organization. And, we'll start by just kind of going into the change management methodology. I'll introduce you to some case studies along the way. And uh, throughout this course, I hope what you take with it is the idea that change can happen and it can be driven by one person to change an organization or change a mindset for continuous improvement. Those of you guys don't know me. Uh, I work a lot and specialize in workforce development education. I lead Star Global College in an effort to promote an affordable means of education. I'm a published author, and at the time of writing this, I had one book published, and now I have four books published. Um, I've written about ISO, healthcare management. I've written about being a Lean Six Sigma champion and how do you champion projects throughout organizations. And ISO 9001, I'm an internal auditor and I teach a facilitator course on ISO quality management systems. And this coincides with my experience leading project teams through Lean Six Sigma, leading organizations to better quality management practices. And my first book, this book is dedicated to my sister who passed away the day I actually published this book. She was really sick for a couple of years, and she had passed the day I published this book. This book means a lot to me, and it's in the QR code. You guys are able to look it up and order the book. All proceeds go to wounded warriors and veterans around the world to help support the cause. Through these pictures and that you see here, I have led organizational change and I have donated almost $77,000 back to organizations throughout the years, and especially higher education organizations, and created scholarship opportunities for veterans. That's where my heart is, and it will always lie. I transitioned out of the Marine Corps in 2012, and I went through some difficult times. And I graduated my undergrad, and I went to get my master's. I then worked on my doctorate, and now I'm working on another doctorate at Walden University, where I'm writing my dissertation on the influences of emotional intelligence on leadership effectiveness in online workforce development organizations. You'll be introduced to real world case studies throughout of my time working with industries. and some other case studies of organizations that have really developed a culture for change management. Now, at the time of recording this, I'm in a position where I may be selected to be the director of change management for Warner Brothers Studios. And they want to uh, pretty much work on changing their organizations. And I'll have a case study talking about that as well. So, throughout today's events, I just want you to take with you just a little bit of learning. I'm recording this lecture to put into my book. Some of my books have QR codes that access the lecture points. So, just kind of keep in mind that we're going to be recorded. So, if you could just not drop any F bombs, I would greatly appreciate that. Do I have any questions before I begin? Awesome. 21 people showed up to this program. Sweet. Now, each slide, I'll have my notes and I'll pull them up. And, essentially, I'll be going through and reading the lecture. If you guys can make sure you're muted, I'll ask questions during the lecture. Feel free to answer these questions. And we'll have times where we'll go through and take a break. I don't see this program being over a 2 hour lecture. But, you know, we'll go ahead and kick things off. So, what is change management? Well, change management is a structured approach to guiding individuals, teams, organizations from their current state of their operation to their desired future state. It's not a random process or reactionary. It's about being proactive and providing a strategic framework that helps organizations thrive and adapt with purpose. At its core, change management isn't just about systems or policies, it's about people at its heart. You can install the best software to launch the perfect process, but if your people don't understand it, believe in it, or see the role in it, it fails. Change management helps organizations adapt to new systems, processes, strategies, and think of it like recalibrating an engine. Every part must align to keep things running smoothly. A great change practitioner balances leadership, communication, and emotional intelligence. When people resist change, it's not defiance, it's the fear of uncertainty or the loss of control. Your role is to guide them through that transition. Change doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't end when the new policy launches or the training is complete. We have to sustain changes, which means we model behavior, culture, and systems to continually evolve after the initial rollout. Implementation of change is easy. Reinforcement is where leadership really shines. In essence, change management transforms disruption into opportunity. It helps organizations evolve with purpose and precision. Every transformation, no matter how challenging, can lead to stronger systems and a more resilient workforce. Think of your own organization. What was one change that didn't go well? Why do you think it struggled? And what was its process? Or what if the people, how could we have led those people better? Now that we understand what change management is, let's dive into why it matters and how poor change management can cost organizations time, talent, and trust. By the end of this course, here's some objectives we have. We're going to define and understand why change management exists. what it solves, and how it aligns with organizational performance. This gives you the foundation to think and act like a practitioner rather than a bystander of change. We'll apply key framework models. In this course, I talk about the Kotter model, the ADKAR model, and the Lean three-stage process. Each one will help us approach transformation differently, whether it's cultural, structural, or behavior changes. And you'll see how these models apply to real-world scenarios. We're going to identify stakeholders and manage resistance with effective communication. You'll learn to identify who's for your change, who's against it, and how to bridge that gap through communication and empathy. Remember, people don't resist change, they resist loss. Your job is connected to change, to a personal and professional gain. Next, we'll develop a structured change plan aligned with the organization's goals. We'll walk through how to build structured change plans from stakeholder analysis and communication planning to reinforcement and sustainability. Like I said before, this isn't just theory. You'll be able to use this plan in your workplace or consulting projects immediately. Finally, we'll talk about measurements. Those KPIs, those key performance indicating values. Change that isn't measured isn't managed, ladies and gentlemen. We'll use performance metrics, surveys, and feedback systems to ensure your change actually delivers results, not just announcements. The goal of this course is very simple. It's to equip practitioners to lead transformation with confidence, strategy, and emotional intelligence. With our objectives set, let's explore real-world need for change and why organizations fail without it, and how practitioners like you can make a difference. Now that we've covered what change management is, let's talk about the people who make it happen, the change practitioners. These are people that build bridges between strategy and people. They take the vision from the boardroom and translate it into actionable items on the front line. Change practitioners are guides through this journey of continuous improvement. They align leadership, communication, and execution so that everyone from executives to the new hires understand why change is happening and how to move it forward. The core responsibilities I want us to look at is the first one is analyzing readiness and identifying barriers to change. Are your people ready? What barriers or resistance exist? You can't measure what you don't manage. And you can't fix what you don't understand first. Next, they facilitate communication between executives and employees. Change often fails in the middle layer. Between leadership and employees, practitioners keep communication open, transparent, and consistent so that everyone stays aligned with the goals and expectations. Design strategies to engage, train, and support teams through transformation. A great practitioner doesn't just approach change, they equip people for it. That means designing training programs, creating employment strategies, or excuse me, creating engagement strategies, that is, and building support systems that help people adapt. Measure adoption rates, culture shifts, and overall impact. A great practitioner doesn't just announce change, they equip people for it. That means designing training programs, creating engagement strategies, and building support systems that help people adapt. All right, I gotta go back. Measurements, adoption, and cultural shifts. It's not enough to just roll out a change. You have to track whether it's sticking. Practitioners use adoption metrics, feedback surveys, and performance data to gauge cultural alignment and impact. And lastly, a change practitioner is a champion in the organization. They don't just see change as a one-time event. They build a culture around continuous improvement where learning, feedback, and adaptation become part of the organization's DNA. A successful practitioner doesn't just manage change, they create momentum and inspire transformation. That's what separates someone who checks boxes from someone who shapes the future in an organization. Let me ask you guys, how many of you have seen change efforts that start strong but fizzle out? And that's exactly where the practitioner makes the difference. They keep the energy and the direction alive long after the kickoff of the project. Now that we know what a change practitioner does, let's explore how they do it through proven frameworks and resilient leadership. You ask yourself, why does this change matter? And I think if we can get the why out of the way, that's one of our biggest barriers. And like I said, people don't resist change, they resist not understanding. Change is inevitable, but successful change is intentional. Every organization changes, but not every organization evolves. That's where change management becomes the difference between chaos and clarity. Organizations that manage change effectively, folks, don't just survive transition, they thrive through them. They experience higher performance, stronger culture, and faster growth because they take a strategic, people-centered approach to transformation. Some key reasons why this matters is when organizations manage change properly, the success rate of their new initiatives skyrocket. Whether it's in systems upgrades, restructuring, or cultural shifts, structured change management makes the process predictable and repeatable. It reduces resistance because resistance is natural, but it's very manageable. By involving people early on and giving them a voice, you replace resistance with ownership. People support what they help create. It aligns strategy and culture. Strategy might come from the top, but execution happens from bottom up. Change management ensures everyone from the CEO to the front line moves in the same direction, speaking the same language. When communication is consistent, transparent, trust builds across multiple levels. And once trust is established, people are far more open to the new way of doing things, the new norm, if you will. And lastly, it drives return on investment through smoother implementation and sustainable adoption. Finally, this is where you see the business impact. Change done right drives return on investment through smoother rollouts, better engagement, and lasting adoption, not just temporarily compliance. Another thing I want to add that's not in my notes here is a lot of projects that I've gone through, and I probably have like 330, somewhere around there. I've kind of lost count of continuous improvement projects, with an average cost savings to an organization of around $75,000 per project. But as I go in and I talk to companies, and although I have over $15 million in cost savings at a minimum, um, change doesn't happen overnight. And I think a lot of times we live in a generation that, we expect results immediately. Change and sustainable change takes time to record, to understand, to trickle down at every level. You got to think about organizations that have had negative outputs. You're not going to change that negativity overnight, just like you won't change a culture overnight. But through resiliency, determination, and consistency, we can turn that uncertainty into opportunity through change management. And we can turn people into champions of progress. So far, we've talked about change management, why it matters, and the role of the practitioner. Now let's look at frameworks that help us bring all of these things to life. To lead change effectively, practitioners use structured models that guide organizations from planning to full adoption. These frameworks don't just replace leadership, they structure it. They give us a roadmap for turning vision into action. There are many models out there, but the three we'll focus on today is the Lewis model, developed by Lewin, introduced one of the earliest and simple approaches to change, the unfreeze, change, and refreeze model. It's about preparing people for change, making the shift, and then stabilizing that change as the new norm. Think of this model as an iceberg, and you unfreeze what's rigid, reshape it, and refreeze it into a new form. One of my favorite models I practice, especially in higher education and executive leadership, is you can have a framework for change. Well, John Kotter expanded that framework and adopted it into how to guide people. The process is into 8 clear steps that focus on urgency, vision, and leadership. It's a detailed framework that connects strategy with people engagement. We'll dive into each of these steps shortly because Cotter's model is one of the most actionable tools for large scale transformation. The ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. It's built around the individual, recognizing that organizations don't change, people do. If people don't move through these 5 stages, the organization can transform successfully. Frameworks don't replace leadership. They help structure it. They give leaders and practitioners consistent way to turn uncertainty into a step-by-step transformational plan. Which of these do you think organizations naturally lean towards? Structure and steps like the Kotter model, simplicity like Lewin's model, or individually focusing on the ADKAR model? Let's start by breaking down the frameworks and see how they form the foundation for almost every modern approach that follows. The Lewin's three-stage model of leadership change is developed by Kurt Lewin. Lewin. It's the classic model, which changes into three actionable stages that focus on shifting organizational behavior and mindset. It's still one of the most practical approaches to change. And I think it's pretty basic. It was developed in the 1940s, and the framework simplifies how organizations move from one state to another. It's timeless because it focuses on behavior and mindset, not just systems. If we look at the first stage of this, it's the unfreeze stage. It's all about preparing the organization for change. Before you can move forward, you have to melt the old habits and beliefs that keep people stuck. You identify what needs to be changed, start with clarity. What problems are we solving and why now? Communicate the why. If people don't understand the reason for change, they resist it by default. Challenge old beliefs and behaviors. You have to create a healthy discomfort. Show people that staying the same is riskier than evolving. Think of it like thawing a block of ice. You can't reshape it until it softens. That's what the unfreeze stage is. A lot of times in human behavior, humans become stuck with trauma or past things that they never resolved, and they just brush over it and don't deal with their feelings, right? And very similar to this, uh, psychologists use therapy models that are based on the Lewin stage model, challenging their beliefs and behaviors. Because a lot of times, you guys have seen people, they get so stuck in their ways that they don't even see the damage that they're causing to themselves. Um, the next stage is change. Engaging teams, well, I guess let me back up. When we talk about change, once the organization is ready, we move into the change phase. This is the actionable phase. This is where new ideas, processes, and mindsets are introduced. Engagement teams, and they engage teams in new ways of working. Changes in a solo effort. It's not a one-man gun show. It's collaborative. We provide training and support as change practitioners because you can't expect performance from people who haven't been prepared. And you encourage innovation and feedback. Allow people to experiment, to speak up, and feedback builds ownership. In this stage, leaders act like facilitators, not dictators. Your job is to guide, listen, and adjust as people learn new behaviors. The last step in this is the refreeze cycle. It's about stabilizing change so it sticks. People need consistency, reinforcement, and make new behaviors the new norm. Reinforcement of new behaviors through policy and culture. Build change into the daily routine, procedures, and recognition systems. This also comes into play with onboarding, that onboarding process should reflect the refreezing cycle. We want to celebrate successes and measurable adoption of those successes. Recognition is reinforcement. It reminds people that change worked. And we establish stability in new systems. The goal is to make a new way to feel natural and reliable. Change sticks when people feel supported, they see the value in what is new. And if people don't feel heard or don't see benefits, they revert back to their old habits, no matter how well the plan was formed. The old phrase, we practice how we fight, essentially that's the truth. In the chaos of change, if you properly train and educate your workforce, it's going to create a more sustainable change model. Think about your own workplace. What's one stage or one change that never made it past the unfreezing stage? And why do you think that failed to stick? Change sticks when people feel supported, they see the value in what's new. If people don't feel heard or don't see benefits, they revert to old habits, no matter how well the plan was written. Lewin's model gives us a foundation, a psychological view, and how people adapt. The unfreeze portion, recognizing the need for change, determine what needs to change, encourage the behavior and the replacement of those old behaviors, and ensure there's a strong support from management, manage and understanding the doubts and concerns. That's what happens during the unfreeze phase. During the change phase, we plan the changes, we implement the changes, and we help employees to learn new concepts or views. During the refreeze phase, it's reinforced and it's stabilized. It's integrating change into the normal way of doing things. We develop ways to sustain the change and celebrate the success of those change. This is a model that is repeatable and reproducible, and you're not going to get everything right off the bat, right? I tell people, when you're looking at a football game, right? The NFL is really big right now, and how do they get that ball down the field? Is it most of the time there's Hail Mary passes? No, it's small incremental changes. And the Lewin's three-stage model of change takes into account that it's a continuous cycle. I spent some time a couple of years back, and I did some work with Ford Motor Company's HR team. And they had the BlueOval electric vehicle plant in Tennessee. It's actually in Stanton, Tennessee. But I want to show how the Lewin's model looks in real life. One of the best examples of large-scale organization change is what Ford Motor Company did with their Blue Oval City electric vehicle power plant, or battery plant, excuse me. This wasn't just a new factory, it was a cultural transformation. Ford had a transition from combustible engine manufacturing to electric vehicle production, a shift that required new skills, new technology, and new mindsets across the organization. Ford started by unfreezing the old way of thinking, the legacy of over a century of gasoline powered innovation. Leadership announced a $5.6 billion investment into a fully electronic plant, signaling serious commitment to change. A new vision was communicating, building the future of American manufacturing. Employees and partnerships were briefed on new skills and sustainable goals. And that's how you unfreeze. You create a sense of urgency that aligns leadership around a clear vision and helps people understand why this change matters. Next, we go to the change phase. This is where we're molding that softness and molding it into what we want to see in the organization. And once the organization was ready, Ford moved into action. uh, Workforce retrained in battery assembly, robotics, and engineering staff. They actually partner, and I don't have this here, but just what we did is we partnered with the college and universities to bring professors in, and we actually were able to save the Ford Motor Company because the state invested tax dollars into their customized training programs. Those of you guys don't know, I come from an economic side or economic development side of the house, and I was an economic developer for the state of North Carolina. So I pitched this idea to them like, hey, you're going to put all this investment, you're going to be hiring these people. The state, they're not going to be able to put down $5.6 billion, but maybe they can put a couple million towards it to offset the cost of training. So we partnered with technical colleges and training programs to upskill workforce. We had Lean Six Sigma methodologies were built into their new EV production lines to ensure quality and efficiency. One thing you notice is Ford didn't just install new equipment, they invested in people and processes. That's what sustainable change looks like. Another part of this too, and what was my favorite contribution to this, is we brought in almost 64 veterans and brought them to jobs in this battery plant. Remember, I told you guys my heart's with veterans and connecting the dots to employment. And you can make a difference by just painting a picture. I think that these change models that you're going to experience is something that can carry with you beyond your current job. You can take this historical data of change methodology and the downfalls of certain things and then use it in different examples. And I think that's what a change practitioner does as well. Was it beautiful? Was the change model perfect? No, absolutely not. But we were able to develop it and develop partnerships, establish training, and integrated new frameworks of change management into the culture. During the freezing stage, the final stage was about embedding the transformation in the institution. Culture was embedded around innovation, safety, and sustainability. Performance metrics established for quality and energy efficiency. The Blue Oval City became a branded as a model for the factory of the future. This wasn't just about freezing progress, it's about stabilizing success. Ford turned a major disruption into permanent part of their identity. Ford didn't just launch a new plant here, it redefined its identity. The refreezing phase wasn't a pause, it was progress made permanent. Think about this. If Ford had skipped the unfreezing phase and jumped straight into building the plant, what would happen to employee morale, readiness, or quality? That's often what the Lewin's model is in action. It's a simple framework guided in a multi-billion-dollar transformation. Overall, this was an exciting project. The guy's name that I was working with was Ryan Smart, and he was an incredible individual. He came from a veteran background and he rose up through the ranks and forward, and that's where we connected. And it's so cool to see how a little bit of influence changed an organization. The Kotter model. Before I go into this, the Kotter model I have seen and I learned about in 2018. John Kotter wrote a book called Leading Change, where he emphasizes the depth of the Kotter model and how it can impact organizations for the better. Um, John Kotter was a higher education model, and he created Carnegie Hall, which is well known in the higher education community as setting a standard, a golden standard for higher education. I learned about the John Kotter model in my time at NC State. That was the first time I had heard this change management methodology. So this was like, I don't know, 2017, 2018, around there. and I was working on a doctorate in educational, like EDD, so educational doctorate. I changed and pivoted away from that because I felt like I had learned all I was going to learn from that doctoral program. I then went in and worked on my PhD, and then now I'm working on a doctorate in business administration with a focus on leadership. And for the first time, I found a program that identifies with my career path, which is basically working with businesses and using proven frameworks to guide and develop a culture for continuous improvement. Isn't that cool? I mean, it's so cool how I finally found a program that aligns with my career progression. Let's go back to this. So, in my time talking about the Kotter model in higher education, Dr. John Kotter went to Harvard Business School, and his model it gave us a foundation, the psychology behind change. Dr. Kotter from Harvard Business School expanded on it with a model for large-scale organizational change, and he called it the Kotter eight-step model, and about turning leadership into movement and movement into lasting transformation. This model is your roadmap when leading change. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this change, it's about how sequence leadership across organizations build that momentum so that the project never stalls out. The momentum of change never stalls out and dies the way most projects do. How do we do this? Well, number one, we create a sense of urgency. Change begins when people feel the need to act. You have to highlight the why now, the risk of doing nothing, and benefits of acting today. Urgency sparks engagement. When I look at Lean Six Sigma projects, and as I talked about, I'm an international trainer and I train all over the world in Lean Six Sigma. I just finished a black belt class up at about 12 o'clock at night last night. One of the things that we talk the most of in Lean Six Sigma is data-driven decision making. I talk about the cost of poor quality, but what's the cost of doing nothing? That creates a sense of urgency. We talk about DPMO, we talk about frameworks and just building off the domain system, but that's not what this course is. But I want to show you how these things can connect to over existing frameworks. Where Lean Six Sigma focuses on the process, the Kotter model helps form the people to focus on the process. Essentially, the creating the sense of urgency, you create a highlighting the need for change and inspire action. You know, Building a coalition is next. And John Kotter emphasized that forming a coalition, a powerful team of credible leaders and influencers who believe in the mission and can drive momentum across departments. Your coalition should include both formal leaders, informal influencers, and the people, others that naturally follow. You build that guiding coalition and then you form strategic vision and initiatives. What does success look like and why does it matter? And it gives direction, meaning, and helping everyone see the bigger picture. Without vision, change feels like chaos. With vision, it feels like progress. One thing I like, and I used to argue this model that these two things should be reversed, that you should form the vision and initiatives before building the culture, or building the coalition. But I think you can have a mini vision of where you want the change to take place. But I also think when you have others in other departments and not just the silo of leadership, but in different uh, or- uh, pro, different uh, different shops in the organization, you create a holistic view to change. They can give in recommendations of how they see the vision fit into their business in different areas. And so building the coalition first with a little bit of a vision, and then you strategically form that vision to dive into initiatives. You communicate the vision across all levels. This is where I think leaders really screw up because they don't manage or realize how much communication is needed because communication isn't a one-time event. It's a campaign. The message must be repeated, clear, and consistent at every level of the organization. Leaders often fail here. They announce the change, but don't reinforce the message, and it fails to stick. Next is empowering broad-based action. We want to engage our workforce and enable them to make decisions at that frontline level. When we empower broad-based action, this is where we remove barriers and give people permission to contribute. That might mean updating policies, simplifying processes, or just getting bureaucracies out of the way so employees can act. Empowerment builds ownership, and ownership builds momentum. We have early wins that help build that momentum. And, as I said, your job as a leader is to empower individuals and help them celebrate progress to create that milestone that builds and keeps the momentum going. When you generate short-term wins or short W's to celebrate progress. Even small victories to keep morale high can improve the change and build off of the change that's working. Consolidate gains and produce more change. Don't stop after the first success. Use that momentum for short-term wins to tackle deeper systematic challenges. This stage turns initial success into sustainable movement. And finally, we make new ways the new norm. This is where we anchor the change in the institution. And this is how transformation becomes identity. The Kotter model turns leadership into movement and movement into lasting transformation. It's a reminder that change doesn't live in a project plan, it lives in people and culture. Which one of these eight-step models do you think most organizations struggle with? Is it urgency? Is it communication? Or anchoring the change? Now that we uncovered Cotter's structured leadership driven model, I want to dive into a case study where all of these features kind of come to life. A little snapshot of how I blend the Kotter model. A little bit different than what John Kotter does, but I apply it in multiple organizations. But the key sense is very much the similar. Kotter's framework transforms strategy into action and action into measurable, lasting change. In 2008, Starbucks faced declining in sales. Um, and that was from overexpansion, diluting brand identity. The CEO, Howard Schultz, returned to lead a transformation using principles similar to Kotter's eight-step framework to return culture, quality, and performance. Schultz didn't just focus on fixing profits, he focused on reviving culture, quality, and purpose. He created that sense of urgency, and the urgency was clear: declining sales, poor customer experience, brand fatigue, and Schultz used those challenges as fuel. He made everyone aware that Starbucks had to change or decline was going to happen further. He built the coalition. He rebuilt his leadership team, experienced managers, store partners, and region leaders who understood the heart of the brand. He didn't just hire executives, he re engaged believers. Through that coalition, he formed a new vision. The vision was simple but powerful. Reignite the emotional connection between customers and coffee. Notice this wasn't about sales or profit, it was about purpose. And that's what makes great change leaders different. I think if you can focus on the purpose, and looking at the longevity of the project or the new change, and not just focus on how much money we're going to make this month, you'll see when you focus on the end state and not just the monetary aspect, but the voice of the customer. And you can turn that into a vision. It creates change at a whole new different level. Next, we have to communicate the vision. And Schultz communicated consistently. He sometimes overly communicated. He had company-wide meetings, open letters, and internal transparency. Every Bartista, store manager, knew what the mission was and why it mattered. Next, he empowered broad-based action. Starbucks retrained over 135,000 Bartistas around the world. They focused on standardization, they focused on customer experience and product quality, and empowering employees to own the customer connection. I'm going to pause here before I continue. You have something called the Hawthorne studies, and the Hawthorne studies was basically in Western Electric, and they started asking people how they feel about the work. And this is in the 50s and 60s, and you saw how that became the institutional ground for empowering the workforce, because for the first time in our studies, we started asking workers, what can make your job better? How can we be more efficient? Same thing here with Starbucks. He retrained the Bartistas to follow the new protocol, the new norm. He explained the why, he gave the training and education, and then they focused on customer experience and product quality, which again empowered employees to own the customer connection again. Next, he generated small short-term wins. They relaunched iconic drinks and simplified their store atmosphere. A quick success that reminded customers why they love Starbucks and in the first place. Next, he consolidated the gains. Building on early wins, Starbucks launched loyalty programs and new digital tools like mobile apps, driving innovation while reinforcing their renewed culture. Lastly, he anchored the change in the culture. Schultz embedded these behaviors into the company's DNA. The passion, the connection, and quality weren't slogans anymore. They became part of every store's operation. Through Kotter's framework, Starbucks transformed decline into resurgency, providing that culture is the ultimate competitive advantage. Think about your own workplace. If your culture started to drift or lose focus, what steps from the Kotter model would you take to realign it? The next is the Prosker ADKAR model. I can just call it the ADKR model going forward, because it's a framework, but it's universal. It applies to various different organizations. One of my biggest and favorite parts about this framework, it's developed by Jeff Haidt. The ADKR model focuses on individual side of change. It emphasizes how people are moved through change one step at a time, and it helps achieve organizational transformation. This is where we shift basically the organizational transformation to the individual level of adoption. It's about the psychology and personal engagement, and perfect for trying everything together. So far we've looked at the Lewin's change model, the Kotter model, both focused on organizational transformation. And I want to bring it closer to the individual level with the ADKAR model. It reminds us that no organization truly changes until its people change. Think of this as a roadmap for how each person from frontline leadership moves through the change journey one step at a time. And if we pause real fast, I don't have it in my notes, but this just kind of hit me that this is built off of the Kubrick loss model. Very similarly, that there are five stages of grief. Well, there's five stages of change in an individual. In the Kubrick-Ross model, you have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the same thing here, and I just kind of pieced that together. That was kind of a cool epiphany I just had. But the first step is awareness, helping people understand why change is happening. And if people don't know the reason, they'll often resent it. And this is where communication matters: clear, honest, and transparent messaging, explaining the purpose, the problem being solved, and the benefits of team or customer. Awareness turns confusion into clarity and resistance into trust. Next is the desire model. People want to change, not just comply with it. You can't force genuine commitment. Desire is built through emotional connection, linking change to personal purpose. Leaders build desire by showing empathy, celebrating wins, and connecting the change to shared values. Change must be something people want, not something they simply tolerate. Knowledge, once people are willing, they need knowledge, the tools, training, and understanding of how to change. Education replaces anxiety with confidence. This is where training programs, workshops, and mentorship really come into play, bridging the gap between intent and capability. Next is ability. Knowledge alone isn't enough. People must have the ability to perform these new skills and behavior effectively. This is where we remove that micromanaging type of leadership and we put in the ability to empower and engage our workforce. This step is about practice, feedback, and coaching. Leaders must create a space for trial and error, and that's how new habits take root. I'll pause real fast and I've seen so many leaders and so many wannabe leaders come through the ranks. Oh, I'm a leader. I'm a great leader. First off, no, you're not. If you say you're a great leader, you ain't the best leader. You got to be humble in your approach. Second, You can't, and I say this in every class, you cannot call yourself a leader unless you're bringing people up with you. Can I get an amen? Capability turns intent into performance. And when we coach and guide and enable and empower our workforce, and we give them ability to make decisions at their level, that's where change really takes place. In the military, they talk a lot about small unit leadership. And, at the time, it was just a buzzword for me. But I started to really adopt that into my leadership thinking with consulting, with leading economic development team, to even being a part of the community college and helping identify areas for improvement. Next is reinforcement. So we've talked about awareness, the desire, the knowledge, the ability. Next is reinforcing that the change sticks. This is where recognition, metrics, and culture come together to sustain progress and make a new norm and a new way of thinking. We use incentives, public acknowledgement, and performance reviews to reinforce new behavior. You think about a Starbucks celebrating small wins in their turnaround. That was reinforced driven change. And, as you guys can see, you can use every one of these frameworks. It doesn't just have to be one or the other. You can adopt these things and blend your own leadership model into play. You think about your own workplace. Which of these five elements of ADKAR was the most change initiative? Which one tends to be the weakest link? And, I want you to think about how you can apply this in organizational change. And not just thinking about it from an organizational level, but how do you get to your employees? How do you make it personal for them to want to change? I used to think about when I was very young in my career, I used to think about like, hey, the way people get a personal connection to it is if you don't do this, homie, you're going to be out of business. And, you know, over time, yeah, that works. People will go about and change because you tell them to. But if you show them the why, you show them a reason, you give them a personal stake at it, all of a sudden you change the mindset. And that's the biggest hurdle in change management. People don't resist change. Uh, they resist the lack of understanding. When I talk about change and I talk about the ADKR model, I like to drive success. I'm a success-driven person. I think about all the cool projects I've been a part of throughout the years. Even creating an educational model that's turned into a college of workforce development that has helped over 1 million students with a reported um, job placement of over 72,000 individuals in the workplace. I I don't want to just say but that's kind of a testament of how change can take place. When you see the need for change and you see a business um, that is struggling, or you see students struggling with not being able to afford education, having to go through all this red tape to just land a class that's 4 hours, and then you also see how we connect. Those of you that have been through here, I'm really big on group connection and finding meaning in these quality educated programs. You know, let's look how This model turns an organization into that next level. This framework gives us the operational roadmap of how to prepare, manage, and sustain change. Think of the ADKAR method as what happens inside people, and this Prosci methodology as what leaders and practitioners do to externalize and guide it. The first phase is all about preparation. Before you launch anything, you define what success looks like, what impacts you expect, and how the approach will change. What does successful outcomes look like behaviorally or operationally? You define the impact, who will be affected, and how deeply. Next, you define approach. You choose your change strategy, communication plan, sponsor engagement, and training design. Preparation is about clarity. You can't manage what you haven't clearly defined. In phase two, we manage the change. Once you have your strategy, you move into the execution. This is where change happens, where people move through the ADKAR stage: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. You plan and act. You launch your change activities, training, communication, coaching. You track performance. You measure adoption rates, feedback, and engagement levels. Adapt actions. You make adjustments based on what's working, where the resistance is forming. And this phase is where leadership and emotional intelligence make a difference. Because plans don't move people, people move people. The third phase, and one that I specialize in, is focusing on sustainability. Change doesn't stick automatically. It has to be reinforced, measured, and owned. Some talking points that we really kind of look at here are review performances. Are we going to evaluate the incomes or the outcomes? Yes. So we evaluate the outcomes. Did the change meet its goals? We create and activate sustainment. And we create accountability structures, new habits, feedback loops, and ownership. And we transfer ownership, transitioning from project team to operational leaders who maintain the new way forward. Change isn't complete when it's launched, it's complete when it becomes the new normal. You prepare the approach, you manage the change, and you sustain it. And that's how practitioners translate strategy into success. Which one of these three phases do you think most organizations overlook? Is it preparation, management, or sustainment? How often does that affect long-term results? What I want to do, I want you guys to take a 10-minute break and then we will come back and we will go into the case study of the ADKAR model. It's no secret, just by looking at my office, how much comic books, comic superheroes have influenced my life. You know, Looking at this from a change management practice, I get excited to talk about my nerdy realm side of me and connecting the dots to how this happens with change management. When I look at change, one of the best examples of the ADKAR model and methodology is in 2022, Warner Brothers Discovery, who owns DC Studios, appointed James Gunn and Peter Safran as the co-CEOs of DC Studios. The mission was to rebuild trust, unify storytelling, and reposition DC as a global entertainment powerhouse. Before that, it was hit or miss with these movies. It was hit or miss. They would have a little bit of alignment, but they didn't unite as storytelling. Each movie really kind of went in its own direction and they try to chop it up and make it a united universe, such very much how Kevin Feige made the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You think about their mission, it was about rebuilding belief, reigniting creative systems, and uniting fans and repositioning DC as a global entertainment. One of my studies I'm working on is the effects of visual leadership and emotional intelligence in creative industries. I've been working on this research for almost 6 months now. And one of my favorite leaders in the industry has been James Gunn. Um, the visual effects of pivoting from an already established universe and pivoting into a new direction, new stories that unite um, creative teams, uniting the fans, and repositioning DC as a global entertainment powerhouse. At the time before then, and during the 2022, DC was fractured. Different storylines, disconnected characters, and divided audiences. Gunn stepped in and was not only the creative director, but a change leader. Um, his approach mirrored the ADKAR metal model perfectly. He started by being transparent, addressing fans and staff directly. He's a big advocate for responding to fans online and helping them understand the direction that DC is headed. He makes people aware of the process, and throughout this, I'm going to go into the different phases of this. But Gunn's leadership mirrored the ADKR model, guiding both creative teams and fans through a large scale change. At the time of recording this, we've had Peacemaker, which was a success, Creature Commandos, and Superman, with the lanterns coming in, and Lantern is one of my favorite superheroes, and not just the different Green Lanterns, but John Stewart, because he was a Marine who was put into an impossible task, and he used his Marine leadership in the comics to really form his own type of leadership approach. And that's what I love about these stories is you can apply these leaderships and frameworks that they use throughout the comics and these movies to show that one person can make a difference. One person can unite creative teams and fans through large scale designs. And that's exactly what James Gunn has done. you know, Gunn has a background, and one of his earliest movies I remember was Scooby-Doo. He was a writer on there. And from there, he had Slither. He had a lot of influence on the MCU as a whole when he became the Guardian. He got the director and creative approach for Guardians of the Galaxy. He invented that whole Infinity Gauntlet storyline that adopted throughout years of storytelling into the MCU. Now, I want to break down how James Gunn, led transformation through the lens of the ADKAR model. This isn't just a case of film direction, it's an example of creative organizational change management in real time. When Gunn and Safran took over, they had to bring an awareness to the film industry, and the company had a fragmented direction, inconsistent films, unclear vision, and created Creative disconnection. The first thing they did was create awareness that's reality. Gunn and Safran's approach were transparent. They didn't hide from the criticism. I mean, they were even saying, hey, we missed the mark here. How can we improve? That's the example of a great leader is using that data from the past instead of just looking in the rear view the full time. They realize that we're supposed to be looking in the windshield and forward thinking and moving forward. Yeah, we can use that rear view mirror to say, hey, these didn't land the way they need to. But they put an approach that, hey, we're going to move forward for this. And awareness starts with the truth. And leaders who face it earn credibility fast. If I come in as a leader and I'm vulnerable and I say, hey, I'm here to make a difference and push us forward. The next, they created a desire, getting people excited for participation in the reboot. Gunn's credibility as a creator after Guardians of the Galaxy and Peacemaker gave fans and staff confidence of believing again in the DC brand. His tone, his hopeful, humorous, and authentic, re-engaged teams that had become cynical. People didn't just follow orders, they wanted to follow his vision. And I think that's what's powerful with leadership is leadership is not just telling somebody what to do. 19-year-old Zach included. Listen to this message. Desire is about emotional currency. Once you inspire belief, momentum follows. Next was the knowledge portion, and that's what came. Gunn didn't keep the plan a secret. He shared updates, character roadmaps, and creative philosophies openly. Writers and producers learned how the new DC universe would function, the phases of it. He's in the phase of gods and monsters right now, characters and structure. That transparency turned anxiety into alignment. Remember, knowledge replaces fear with focus. Next was his ability, turning vision into execution. Gunn began with projects like Superman and Creature Commandos, implementing new production systems and storytelling standards. He gave creators both clarity and freedom, a rare balance in large studios. That combination empowered people to perform at their best. You know, the real ability isn't just skill, it's the environment that allows skills to thrive. Next was reinforcement. Gunn celebrated progress consistently, both internally and publicly, excuse me. Early wins like Season Maker or Peacemaker Season 1 and the positive DCU announcement reinforced trust. Each success shared transparency, creating visible proof of progress. And reinforcement transforms beliefs into habits. And that's when change becomes an identity throughout the organization. One of the things that I've noticed so much differently than Kevin Feige or other people in the Marvel universe is they uh, James Gunn is not afraid to go out and talk about these projects that he's passionate about, talk about the direction he's heading. And, you know, that reinforces transparency, consistent fan engagement, and early wins reinforce trust. And Gunn made progress visible, celebrating each milestone publicly and internally. James Gunn's leadership mirrors the ADKAR model. He rebuilt not just a studio, but faith in the creative process itself. And that's what true change practitioners do. They restore trust, clarity, and purpose. When you look at your own teams, who's your James Gunn? Who's the leader willing to face the truth, inspire belief, and rebuild culture? Remember, transformation isn't about titles or hierarchy or rank or structure. It's about having the courage, the clarity, and consistency. Overall, this is one of the most inspirational leaders I've seen in my favorite realm, and I appreciate you guys letting me share this case study. It's a little bit outside of manufacturing or hospitality or banking or these other industries I've worked in throughout the years, and let me share this little glimpse of how real leaders change the outlook of an organization. You know, Gunn didn't just relaunch a brand, he rebuilt belief. And he created ADKAR methodology at DC Studios, and it proved that transformation starts with awareness, builds through desire, and sustains through culture. When we look at the awareness, I've already kind of talked about the left side of this, but I want to talk about the outcome. In awareness, he was able to do this where he made stakeholders understand change was critical. Prior to the past, Warner Brothers had such a control on their project. And you saw directors like Zack Snyder come in, who was incredible, 300, did The Watchmen, went in and he tried to do, he did an amazing job on Man of Steel. Batman versus Superman is when the studio got really involved with this creative process. And you see the difference between what was released in theaters to his extended cuts to Justice League, where you had Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was a completely different movie. Now, Zack had to snap away during Justice League, and Josh Whedon, the director of Avengers, came in to take his model and do his own thing with. But Zack Snyder had to step away because his daughter had committed suicide. And rightfully so, he took a break from it. And the pressures of Warner Brothers kind of really diluting what he was trying to do. And hopefully one day we may get the final vision of it, either through live action or animated. I hope one day. But Gunn was able to come in and he was able to communicate his vision to stakeholders, and they understood why change was critical. He built the desire, building motivation and buy-in throughout the organization, and it renewed excitement and internal commitment. Knowledge, he provided the roadmap of where they're going. I talk about the first phase is going to be gods and monsters, and the projects will be updated as he's going through. But it gives clear direction and transparency across departments. You give people the ability, so you empower execution. At the time that this was created, it was still called Superman Legacy. It since was just renamed as Superman. So if you see Superman Legacy in there, it's called that, a Superman. And he launched a pretty much unheard of brand, Command Creature Commandos, and he created a unified storytelling approach. But he gave teams the ability to apply new creative and operational processes. Next, he reinforced where he created the sustainable wins along the way. You can see the wins in each final project, and it really gives fans service to creative storytelling and the power of visual leadership on an organization. Um, it he rebuilt trust, and that new trust became the heart of DC's new culture. Overall, this along with, Peter Safran and James Gunn and the new executive team at Warner Brothers Discovery. You're seeing the impact of storytelling. The movies don't seem so choppy or combobulated or all over the place. There's a unified approach in the direction it's headed. We talk about stakeholder engagement, and we have through this previous case study and through different examples, you can't have a process change without involving your stakeholders. Every successful change effort, whether it's a company transformation or creative reboot like DC Studios, comes down to one thing: people. Stakeholder engagement and communication uh, are how we connect people to purpose. If change is the engine, communication is the fuel that keeps that engine going. When we define stakeholder engagement, change succeeds when the right people are informed, involved, and inspired. Stakeholder engagement ensures alignment between leadership, employees, and customers, and all moving towards the same vision. Number one, we identify who's impacted and how they're influenced. The first step is basically mapping your stakeholders, who will be the most affected by the change and who has the power to support it or block it. Influence mapping is critical to building early movement. Always engage your influencers first, and that support will multiply your reach. Next, communicate the right message to the right person and at the right time. Every stakeholder has different concerns. Executives want ROI, that return on investment. Employees want clarity, and customers want stability. You tailor your message to each audience so it resonates with them and not just informs. When Ford launched the BlueOval City, leaders spoke about sustainability to engineers, opportunities to workers, and innovation to investors, all part of the same vision, but delivered differently. You build trust through transparency and active listening. Change communication isn't one way, it's a dialogue. It's about being honest about challenges, share progress updates, and listen actively to feedback. Trust grows when people are heard. And I'll say it again: trust grows when people feel heard. You encourage feedback and participation. You invite people to help shape the change. When individuals contribute ideas or improvements, resistance fades and ownership increases. People support what they help create. Monitor engagement to ensure sustainable commitment. We track participation levels, attendance at meetings, survey responses, training completion, and morale. Engagement is measurable, and measuring it ensures accountability. Engagement doesn't just end at the rollout. Sustaining communication is what turns temporarily compliance into a long-term culture. The takeaway from this is people support what they help create. Effective communication turns resistance into collaboration. Think about your own organization. who are the key stakeholders, what do they need to hear versus what they already know. We want to keep the stakeholders aligned and the communication flowing. Stakeholder mapping is where you're helping the stakeholder understand and focus your energy where it matters most. Not everyone needs the same message, but everyone needs the right level of engagement. This is how we make our communication strategic and not just frequent. Because not everyone needs the same message, but everyone needs the right level of engagement. Stakeholder mapping helps us focus on our energy where it matters most. It ensures that managing influence is not just disrupting information. They identify individuals or group affected by change. This can include executives, department heads, employees, clients, and even external regulators. You access their influence and interest. How much power do they have to impact the change? How interested are they in the outcome? And you develop tailored communications and engagement strategies. This is where you decide what gets messaged, how often, and in what format. A simple but powerful tool is the power interest grid. It divides your stakeholders into four main categories and tells you exactly how to manage each. Your high point of interest, your high power, high interest. These are your executives, sponsors, and key leaders. They keep keep them involved through direct updates, strategy sessions, and milestone reviews. Their buy-in determines the project's momentum. You don't just inform these people, you partner with them. High power, low interest is keep satisfied. This group includes regulators, external partners, or high level stakeholders who aren't in the day to day operation. We keep them updated occasionally, enough so they remain confident in the direction but not overwhelmed with the details. Next is low power, high interest. These are your staff, your support teams, your trainees. They may not have as much influence, but they care deeply about the change. They keep the communication open, transparent, and motivational. They're your ground level champions. Your low power, low interest is just monitoring individuals. These groups include peripheral roles or external objectives. You don't ignore them, you simply monitor their engagement and step in only if their influence or interest changes. The key takeaway here is effective change leaders don't just communicate equally, they communicate strategically. The goal isn't to talk to everyone at the same frequency, it's to ensure every stakeholder feels informed, valued, and aligned. Take a moment to think about your last change initiative. Did you over communicate with low interest groups or under communicate with your sponsors? How might have that shifted the results? The communication planning. Communication is the heartbeat of successful change. It turns strategy into story and story into action. When we look at change and the effectiveness of change, the objectives are clear. We want to ensure stakeholders understand the vision, progress, and the impact of change. We want to deliver the right message through the right channel at the right time. We want to reinforce trust and transparency at every phase of the transformation. You know, Transformation is the foundation of credibility. When leaders share openly, including setbacks, people trust the process even more. We align communications with project milestones, communicate early, reinforce often, and always connect updates to what matters the most to our audience. When in doubt, communication before rumors fill the silence. You want to keep it simple, consistent, and purpose driven. Your goal isn't to impress, it's to connect. Great communicators repeat the same message in multiple ways until everyone gets it. Medians, you use a mix of tools, emails, town halls, dashboards, social media, and internal updates. The key is to meet your people where they already are, not where you wish them to be. We talk about feedback loops and encouraging a two-way communication. Feedback channels, surveys, QAs, open forums give employees the physiological safety to share their voice. And we measure it. We track engagement through surveys, participation levels, and sentiment analysis. If people aren't responding or morale dips, that's not a failure. It's data guiding your next step. And remember, people don't fear change, they fear confusion. Clear, consistent communication creates confidence. And, essentially, confidence turns uncertainty into progress. What was one time in your career where poor communication killed the momentum? And how might a structured plan like this have changed the outcome? Resistance to change. That's oftentimes the biggest hurdle I see in any change management methodologies. Communication is the heartbeat of successful change. It turns strategy into story and story into action. Whenever we talk about change, we have to address what's often the hardest part, and that's resistance. Resistance isn't failure, it's feedback. It's the organization telling you where fear, uncertainty, or fatigue exist. The goal isn't to eliminate resistance, it's to understand and manage it. People don't resist change itself, they resist loss, loss of control, loss of familiarity, loss of confidence in their ability to adapt. And when we treat resistance as defiance, we push people away. When we treat it as dialogue, we bring people closer. When people understand the why, they stop seeing change as a threat and see it through their role in the mission. Sometimes resistance exists because the wrong message is being sent to the right person. Tailor your communication so it matches their level of involvement and their concerns. Even if you don't have all the answers, transparency and trust build physiological safety. People can handle bad news, and they can't handle what's being left in the dark. Addressing concerns early, We don't wait until resistance to activate pushback. The earlier the people are involved, the more ownership they feel. You keep your message simple and purpose driven. Confusion builds rumors, and rumors breed fear. Using communication channels and participations, team meetings, Q&A sessions, dashboards, or anonymous feedback surveys, the most visible and interactive the process is, the less intimidating it becomes. We encourage feedback loops, not just for words, but for emotions. And often resistance hides between politeness and silence. We track engagement and participation, and if attendance or feedback drops, that's an early indicator of disengagement. Measure sentiment and not just completion. Resistance fades when people feel seen, heard, supported, and a part of the process. Think about a time you resisted change, maybe a new policy, maybe a new leader, or a new system. What made you hesitate? What eventually made you buy in? And that's the empathy we need as change practitioners. Resistance management, resistance is a natural reaction to change. It's not a barrier, but a signal that people need clarity, support, or reassurance. A skilled practitioner will learn how to listen, address, and align rather than push back. You want to identify early signs of resistance, understand the underlying cause, and apply proactive strategies to re-engage and build trust. Common causes of resistance that we've seen throughout any change management ideology is the lack of awareness or understanding of why the change is needed, the fear of job loss, skill gap, or new expectations, poor communication or conflicting messages, change fatigue, another new thing. And they may perceive it as unfair or exclusion from decision making. Strategies to overcome the resistance is number one, involve employees early, co create the solution with them, provide training and coaching to build confidence, communicate openly and consistently, and celebrate those small wins to reinforce the momentum. Lead with empathy, address emotional as well as operational concerns. Resistance isn't rejection, it's a request for understanding. Measuring success. What gets measured gets improved. That's from Peter Drucker, a process engineer who has a long list of change management ideologies that create sustainable change throughout organizations. To sustain transformation, practitioners must track progress, adoption, and impact with clarity and consistency. We evaluate the effectiveness of the change initiative. We identify areas for need that need reinforcement or adjustment. And we demonstrate the return on investment and long-term organizational belief. Measuring change, there's several things we can do and key metrics to kind of take into place is adoption rates, the percent of employees active using new systems or progress, awareness and understanding, surveying results or training participation rates, employee sentiment, feedback, engagement, pulse driven surveys, performance metrics, talking about efficiency, quality, cost, or an output improvement. And sustainable indicators are continued use of new behaviors 6 to 12 months out. I think when we do this, we create an adoption metric to change and understand that change at a quantifiable level. Some tools we utilize: surveys and readiness assessments, post implementation reviews, and continuous feedback loops, dashboard tracking for leadership visibility. Success isn't just driving change, it's sustaining it through measurable impact and continuous improvement. Well, how do we sustain that change? Change doesn't end at implementation, it evolves. Sustainment ensures that new behaviors become the new norm, that progress continues long after the project closes. We maintain the momentum after going live. We reinforce new habits, culture, and accountability, and we build feedback systems through ongoing improvements. Some key strategies here are celebrating the wins, recognizing their achievements and visible wins, embedding the change, aligning the policies, the rewards, and evaluations to new behavior. Monitor performance. You review adoption and engagement regularly. You gather feedback. You keep listening to stakeholders at all levels. You train, coach, and adapt processes as organization evolves. You look for driving continuous learning. You guys can also take this with you when you're applying for jobs or you're trying to change something about yourself that is going to lead to a better result for you. Continuous learning is all about self-development and organizational change. And we keep changing for the better. The old ways of thinking or the we've always done it this way is a mentality that kills leadership. Some frameworks I utilize: Kanban, right? Kanban is a Japanese term for a visual signal. It's a workflow visualization system that helps teams manage tasks effectively and efficiently and improves transparency and maintains steady flow. The objectives here is it increases efficiency through visual task tracking. It improves collaboration and communication within teams, and it balances workloads to avoid burnout or bottlenecks, and it promotes continuous delivery and improvement. I'm going to pause here and you'll see Kanban throughout all kinds of change management processes, like whether it's Lean Six Sigma, the Scrum ideology, the Agile ideology, or others. You'll see Kanban as a way to visualize and signal when things are in the process. I see Kanban boards a lot in the early 2000s. I saw it for engineering and infrastructure, and a lot of people are like, I don't need to know Scrum because I'm not in engineering or this. No, it's a framework that helps you complete a project. Kanban's a tool within it. The core principles is visualizing the work using boards, either physical or digital, to track progress and tasks. Next is it limits the work in progress, WIP, which focuses on completing tasks before starting a new one. You manage the flow of it to track how work moves through systems, to identify delays, to make policies more explicit. You define clear roles for task understanding and transition. You implement feedback loops in it that provide guidance or regularly adjust the workflow. I always say in that last phase, you can say doing here, done, and then you can have some type of quality metric. Now, this can go as you don't have to stick to just the three areas. You can expand off of it. But before that thing gets released to the customer or stakeholder or ran, you need to make sure it's quality checked. The definition of done is important here. We use Kanban as practitioners to do, in progress, and review to done. It's for change projects. We combine with Scrum for agile change hybrid management, and we apply it to communication plans, training rollouts, and certification tracking. I even use Scrum in Star Global College's model. Kanban brings visibility to change, turning complexity into clarity and motion into measurable progress. Some other frameworks I think are very, very good for you guys to know. A lot of these are certification programs that we offer, and there's other organizations that offer it as well. Um, but if you can learn about frameworks to apply on the job and you get certified in it, it and then you use it in a training environment. Once you use it in the training environment, it sticks with you to use in your everyday job. It's on you to implement it into your career. We'll talk about Lean Six Sigma, Scrum, the Deming cycle, and Kaizen events. Change is a cycle, not a conclusion. Sustained success belongs to organizations that never stop improving. So these are some continuous improvement methodologies that I have used throughout my entire career. Everything we have talked about, I have applied at some type of organization to institute change. Now, I will tell you this before moving forward. You're not going to be the most liked person in the room being a change practitioner. People are going to try to argue with you left and right. But if you can see the vision and you align it to the company's vision and you can paint why it's important, you not only change the process, you change an organization. Lean Six Sigma is one of my favorite things. I'm an international trainer and I contribute to the body of knowledge for Lean Six Sigma around the world. Lean Six Sigma combines the efficiency of lean, which is eliminating waste, trimming the fat, if you will, with the precision of Six Sigma. So you're reducing that variability and you're using, it's basically a set of managerial strategies to reduce errors using statistical measures. It streamlines processes to deliver faster, high quality results. It eliminates non-value added time activities. It reduces errors and variations to improve customer satisfaction. And it creates a culture for continuous improvement at all levels. At its core, you have the DMAIC process, right? Defining the problem. This is where we identify the problem and project goals. Measure is where we collect data to ensure the performance baseline. Analyze, we analyze the root behavior and defects and inefficiencies in the process, and we basically find out. We rip that band-aid off and we investigate what is the root cause of this issue. Improve, that's where we implement and test targeted solutions. And control is where we sustain gains through monitoring and standardization. And Lean Six Sigma has been, I've been a practitioner of it since 2013, and I became a master black belt facilitator in 2017. And throughout my progress, my projects and industries, I've always reverted back to Lean Six Sigma because it's such an excellent framework for continuous improvement. Each phase you learn about different skills and different tools that you can utilize and implement to create and drive change through an organization. We integrate DMAIC into change initiatives for measurable results. We use lean tools, value 5S, value stream mapping, Kaizen events to visualize improvements. And we align organization strategy to drive performance excellence. Lean Six Sigma transforms changes from a reaction into a precision engineered improvement system. The next is a newer ideology that came around in the early 2000s with, the invention of the internet. The agile methodology or the Scrum framework is an agile framework that emphasizes collaboration, adaptability, and iterative progress. It empowers teams to deliver results quickly while continuously learning and improving. You break large change initiatives into manageable time box cycles. So we call these sprints in this ideology. Um, you encourage transparency, accountability, and teamwork. A lot of that is the pillars of Scrum. And you adapt rapidly to new information and stakeholder feedback. It delivers continuous value, not just at the end of the project, but it creates a cycle framework to continue growing. The core roles of Scrum, product owner, they define the vision, the priorities, and requirements. The Scrum Master, which is they facilitate the process, remove obstacles, and then the dev team or the development team is execute work, collaborates, and self-organizing. Scrum events, you have sprint planning. That's where we define the goal and scope. You have daily Scrum events, which is a 15-minute progress and blocker meeting every day. And a sprint review is where you showcase the results and gather feedback. Sprint retrospective is where you reflect and identify the improvements for the next sprint. What's really cool about this is, I see Scrum being such a new way of thinking. With the DMAIC system, it's very rigid in its approach. Well, Scrum's kind of like you're building the airplane while you're flying that bad boy at the same time. It produces quality product, and you're not waiting 6 months to get a product to a customer that's outdated, especially if you think the advances in technology. Scrum is a great way to learn about the project management ideology in the agile realm. Um, a few of the courses I'm a Scrum facilitator, so I teach courses from product owner, Scrum Master, and a lot of these programs are embedded in the College of Workforce Development for you guys. But this is a great opportunity for you guys to grow in the agile methodology, and it's becoming one of the leading certifications in the newer workforce age. We use Scrum to manage change in iterative phases. It's about minimizing disruption. We apply sprint cycles to training, communication rollouts, and pilot launches, and it's combined with Lean Six Sigma for a structured agility, meaning that it's very flexible. And Scrum turns change into momentum, empowering teams to learn, adapt, and deliver faster than traditional methods. The Deming cycle is a change management philosophy, and Edward Deming, and he was a statistician, world-renowned engineer, and he worked with Henry Ford to help Toyota, Japan after World War II, revitalize their economy and improve off of Ford's model. Where Henry Ford and Ford Model T production was 100 vehicles a month, they were able to take that philosophy to Japan, and all of a sudden, the Toyota production system, or what we know as Toyota today, was producing 1,000 cars a month with better quality. The Deming cycle is a powerful tool, and I've worked. I had a professor that worked under Edward Deming, and Edward Deming passed away in the early 90s. So a lot of my teaching and straightforward approach and to decision making comes from the Deming cycle and my influence. His influence on my teachings have turned out incredible results in organizations. Like I said, at minimum, I have at least $15 million in cost savings initiatives to organizations. I've impacted the ability to save companies money, so that way they could hire new workers. You think about it, I've started this school that has helped almost 1 million people with a direct impact of 72,000 people landing a career over 85K. The Deming cycle, plan, do, check, or plan, do, study act, depending on what terminology or what body of knowledge you look at, is a simple yet powerful framework for deriving continuous improvement in any process, team, or organization. It ensures that change is tested, measured, and redefined, not just implemented. It promotes a culture for learning and improvement. It minimizes risk by testing change before its full rollout. It creates feedback driven culture focused on results. And it supports sustainable data based decision making. Plan, we identify opportunities for improvement and define measurable objectives. The do, we implement changes on a small scale and pilot or test the phases. Check. Analyze results and compare outcomes against goals. And act, you standardize successful improvements or adjust and restart the cycle. Now, you notice throughout this whole course, everything can kind of come back to the Deming cycle in some sense. You use PDCA for post-change reviews and sustainment. It integrates with Lean Six Sigma and continuously monitoring perfectly, and it's applied to a training evaluation, system optimization, and process audits. We use PDCA, like I said, for reviews and sustainment. We integrate it with Lean Six Sigma for continuous monitoring, and we apply it to training evaluations, systems optimization, and process audits. PDCA transforms organizations from a one-time event into a continuous improvement habit. Remember here, we talk about to be an effective change practitioner, you have to develop a culture. To be a so-called quote unquote leader, you have to raise people up with you. Kaizen. This is the culture for continuous improvement. It's a philosophy that focuses on small, consistent improvements made by everyone every day. It transforms organizations by empowering workers to identify and eliminate waste, improve efficiency, and build a culture of ownership. It fosters a mindset for continuous improvement, incremental improvement. It encourages every employee to participate in positive change, eliminate waste, streamline workflows, and enhance quality, and strengthen morale through inclusion and empowerment. Some core principles of Kaizen, and those of you that have gone through the Lean Six Sigma class, you can see how this fits right at home. And you might ask, Zach, why don't I call it Lean Six Sigma instead of Kaizen? A lot of organizations, they've had a bad approach to Lean Six Sigma. It was a failed methodology, wasn't a strong leader leading the change. And so when I've done consulting before or to go in and teach lectures, they'll say we don't want to call it Lean Six Sigma. We've had just a bad approach to it. So I'll call it Kaizen, but essentially this adds into the lean methodology of thinking. We identify waste, muda is the Japanese word for it, but we eliminate activities that add no value. We empower people, encourage suggestions, participations from all levels, and we standardize best practices. We document and repeat what works. We measure and reflect. We track performance outcomes and adjust continuously. And team collaboration. It's important and it's everybody's responsibility. The power of Kaizen, it goes so far. You can integrate Kaizen into improvement projects. You use Kaizen boards to suggest systems to capture ideas. You combine Kaizen with Lean Six Sigma for a cultural sustainment. And overall, it creates, and very similarly to the PDCA cycle, it creates change from one habit to continuous improvement habit. Throughout this lecture, we covered the improvement methodologies, whether Lean Six Sigma, Scrum, PDCA, Kaizen to Kanban. These are tools for driving efficiency, agility, and continuous improvement. You have the change management frameworks, the ones we started with, the Lewin's Kotter model and ADKAR model, strategies for leading people through transformation. You have stakeholder engagement, and communication is where you're mapping influence, building trust, and crafting clear messages that inspire actions. You resist. We talked about resistment to management, turning pushback into partnerships through empathy, training, and transparency. And we talk about measuring success and sustainability, using data-driven reflection models to reinforce and lock in long-term results. You know, we want to be the architect of change and not observe it. Some key takeaways, if you take away anything from this training event, change is a process. It's not an event. People drive transformation. It helps us lead with clarity and compassion. Sustainable improvement blends structure with agility to culture. And every practitioner has the power to turn disruption into progress. Throughout all of this, I hope you guys have learned an incredible amount of being a change practitioner. I talked about business case studies with the BlueOval City to Starbucks to even DC Studios. We talked about figures such as Edward Deming, James Gunn, Bill Smith with the Lean Six Sigma ideology, and how they impacted organizations grow. You can't measure what you don't. You can't manage what you don't measure. You can't be a leader unless you bring others up with you. And my last bit is the good Lord gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. You need to listen more than you talk. When you listen to workers, when you understand their resistance to change, that's where change takes place. If you can help understand the why, you can move them through the process to create a culture for continuous improvement. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Those of you in class, I'm going to give you the exam. Those of you guys watching this online, you can take the exam by scanning the QR code, and you'll take a 10, 15 question exam. Wait about up to 15 minutes, and you should receive your certification as a change practitioner. I want to thank you guys for coming to this class. I'm going to close out the recording and I'm going to talk to you guys one-on-one. Thanks for being here. Come back to Star Global. We teach a lot of programs that help guide your organization for change. And thank you.